It's the Auburn Observer Podcast. We're back. Justin Ferguson here, joined by my co-pilot per usual, Dan Peck.
Ahoy, Justin. Great to be here in the Wings 94.3 studio. Sounds a little bit different because we're not using the Wings studio equipment. We've cranked up the Observator for this one, but we're still in the studio. We've locked the door. We've barricaded ourselves in here, and yeah, Wings. We're probably not going to talk too much Auburn baseball on this show, but if you want to catch Auburn baseball as they play a really exciting super regional series, Wings 94.3 is going to be your home for that series here in the Auburn-Opelika area. Classic hits, too. Big shout-out to Wings 94.3 for letting us use the studio.
Well, Dan, you got to tell everybody what's on Wings 94.3 right now.
You know what? They just had a pretty solid run. We saw some Toto. We saw some Huey Lewis in the news. Billy Squire is there right now. Everybody Wants You or The Stroke are my favorite Billy Squire songs. This one's In the Dark. Def Leppard coming up, of course, as well. So yeah, listen to Wings 94.3. Big shout-out to them for all the help.
So we have the Observator cranked up for one reason and one reason only, and it's usually because we have a guest who is not in studio with us. We have one of our dear friends from out in Greater Observer Country, and we are pleased to be joined by the Observer First Ballot Hall of Famer, the all-time great podcast guest, the man, the myth, the legend, Dogs 247's own Jordan Hill. Jordan, how we doing, buddy?
Doing good. You know, I was a little misled. I was told this was a disgruntled Braves fan Zoom, but I think I'll hang around and see what's up. But no, it's great to catch up with y'all.
Yeah, we recorded this on Monday, not because it's better for our schedule. It's because the Braves have an off day today, and we don't have to worry about that today. So, but yeah, we've got a lot to talk about here with Jordan today because, you know, those of you who listened last week, we had teased that we were going to have Jordan on. Obviously, everything blew up last week with Auburn basketball with the Tahad and the Filip Jovic news. So we pushed Jordan back to this episode. But, Jordan, you just came back from your annual visit down to SEC spring meetings. This is probably the second or third time we have had you on specifically spring meetings relating, so always a good off-season one. And I guess right off the bat, Jordan, like this seemed to be one of the more, I don't know, attention-grabbing SEC spring meetings that we have seen in a while, but I don't think it was because of anything news-related. Like nothing concrete came out of it. But they got a ton of attention, and Greg Sankey did specifically. It seemed like every day down there last week, something was kicking up a firestorm of activity online. So, I mean, what was it like being down there knowing that, like, this was for, late May in the college athletics calendar, where really the only thing going on is baseball and softball, that, like, the SEC, and specifically SEC football, was bang front and center, and a lot of people were talking about it, and a lot of people were upset about it.
You kind of got the sense it was going to be that kind of week on Monday, Memorial Day. That's typically when I get down there, and Greg Sankey usually basically gives like an opening press conference, and usually not that many media people are there because, again, it's Memorial Day. People are getting down there and kind of getting settled. And he's immediately taking shots at the ACC and the Big 12, being like, yeah, I didn't really appreciate some of the statements coming out from those two conferences. And yeah, it's one of those things, especially like with a few days removed from it, where you're kind of looking back and you're like, okay, what was accomplished as far as things being passed? And there really wasn't a ton. I mean, I'd say the majority of what happened last week that's going to matter in the long run was sort of the SEC posturing in certain ways, getting a sense of what the SEC wants to get done, and at least what they prefer as far as future playoff models and things like that. I mean, I think the biggest thing that got passed was that the SEC, you know, they used to kind of have like an escalator when it came to teams having crowds storm the field or storm the court.
Yeah.
Now it's just straight up, hey, if it happens, it's a $500,000 fine. It's not like, you know, however many offenses you have, that number goes up. But no, I mean, the biggest thing was just sort of seeing the temperature on a lot of the topics around college athletics right now. And the funny thing with how spring meetings is set up, it's not like SEC media days. You know, a lot of this is catching people coming out of meetings. You do have a few scheduled press conferences. Kirby Smart had one. I know Mike Elko had one, and Greg Sankey has one every day. But sometimes you'd be in a room, I'd be working on stories and basically see Twitter where media members have called an AD or a coach coming out of a meeting, and you go, oh, wow. Like, they said something really explosive or something at least worth talking about. So, productive week. Again, it's one where what happened in the immediate, may not exactly affect like what SEC football will look like in 2025. But we learned quite a bit, and we've at least got a sense of what may be coming down the track as far as the SEC is concerned.
There was quite a bit of talk about the future of the college football playoff from Greg Sankey and discussion from ADs and coaches. What's your sense of the disconnect between the model that is seemingly preferred by Greg Sankey and the ADs that would guarantee spots to the SEC versus reports that maybe the coaches prefer a model that doesn't guarantee admittance to any conference aside from 5 conference champions and would rather take a lot of at-larges?
And I think it's a conversation that's ongoing because when we are recording this, just a little while before that, Greg Sankey was on the Dan Patrick Show, and I saw where his conversation, it kind of seems like Greg Sankey isn't crazy about having any automatic qualifiers, but that they sort of understand where things are going. I think right now they're looking at a 5-11 system where you have the 5 highest ranked conference championships and those 11 at-larges. And the reason, like Dan mentioned with the SEC coaches, I think they don't want any automatic qualifiers because they think the SEC is strong enough that they can get more than what's automatically qualified. Because, kind of going into spring meetings, it seemed like there was momentum behind what they were calling the 4-4-2-2-1-3. And the 2 4s to start that are 4 guaranteed spots for the SEC and 4 for the Big Ten. And I think as the conversation went on last week, people were basically saying, why are we limiting ourselves to 4? And granted, you could get some of those other at-larges, but the 3 at the very end of that model is a 3 at-larges, but you have to think Notre Dame's probably getting one of those most years, so that's really only 2 open spots. So I think that was sort of where that conversation went. I think the biggest thing that I was struck by with Greg Sankey down in Destin was that they're really pushing for the playoff committee to sort of change how they look at the criteria and determining who makes the playoff. They really want an emphasis on strength of schedule. I was looking at these numbers before we started recording. Went and looked at ESPN's Football Power Index, and you look at the top 10 teams as far as that, and this is just strength of schedule. This isn't considering how good these teams were or anything like that. 9 of the 10 teams with what ESPN saw as the toughest schedules were either SEC or Big Ten.
Yeah.
And then the other team was Notre Dame. Now, again, you have to count in what those teams' records were, how good they were. But, I think the SEC is really trying to go down a path where they can try to get, 5-6 teams into a 16-team format. Now, is that right? I mean, I don't think so. I think that, some of the conversation last week where, even Kirby Smart was like, I had a hard time, I'm paraphrasing here, but he was like, I had a hard time seeing Ole Miss, Alabama, and South Carolina not considered among the top teams because they didn't make the playoff. I'm just not one who thinks we need, half the field to be SEC teams. And
Right.
I just want to see, what the SEC does. There was discussion about doing what's best for the sport. I need to see that to believe that when it comes to the SEC, because I think they understand they have the power right now, right along with the Big Ten, and I do think they're going to do everything they can to take advantage of that.
So, Jordan, I think one of the things that was, I mentioned earlier about the firestorm, a lot of people, at least those outside of the SEC or people who aren't necessarily SEC fans, were perceiving the constant stuff coming out of Destin last week, especially from Sankey, as just kind of whining or like just a lot of grandstanding for no real reason. And I'm of the opinion where it's like, I've always thought this about kind of anything, but we can really expand this into college sports, college conferences. If you're the best, you don't have to say that. right? And we know the SEC is the best. The Big Ten, I guess the Big Ten right now has the bigger TV deal. They have more money right now.
And the reigning national champion.
And they have the reigning national champion, correct. But also we see that the SEC top to bottom for decades now has been the best conference in college football pretty much every season. What is the end goal, or kind of what is the point of, Greg Sankey coming out and just saying all this over and over again, to the fact, like, I saw the last day they were down there with the packet, and it's like, I mean, I guess, there's some value in, like, being able to tangibly say, okay, look at, like what you just brought up with the football power index and the strength of schedule. Like, that stuff matters, but it's also, like, I don't know, it just kind of felt like either preaching to the choir or just pissing off everybody else on the outside.
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing to me is just, they want more of their teams to have a fight and have a spot in this expanded playoff when, I mean, I think they should just be happy to have the teams that can get in and can conceivably, contend for a national championship. And, again, it's one of those things, like, on one side, I understand, like, that's Greg Sankey's job. He's the SEC's commissioner. He's going to fight for whatever. But, yeah. I mean, I'd already left by the time the packets were handed out.
Oh, man, like, I was hoping you could get – I hope we wanted your copy. We wanted – if you were going to do anything with it.
Sell that on eBay.
Yeah, I know. I really missed out there. But, no, I'm with you guys on that. Like, I have a hard time kind of wrapping my head around it, other than – they really want to try to convince people. And, luckily, I feel like a lot of the reaction I saw was like, just shut up. I mean, like, just, that's,
well, it seems,
not, yeah.
It seems rooted in the belief that Alabama should have made the playoff last year.
Right.
Like, that's where some of it seems, and
it's one thing for Kalen DeBoer to come out and say he's the coach. He's the coach of Alabama. Even though I think it's absolutely insane that you're like, yeah, we should have been in the playoff. We lost to Vanderbilt, and we got smoked by a bad Oklahoma team.
I'm old enough to remember just how unpopular selecting Alabama for the playoff would have been after that SMU game. Like, you're right. Like the idea that 6 months later the story is that it was this crime against the SEC and the bid was stolen from the SEC. And like, no, that's not what happened.
And it just felt like,
like, no.
And it just felt like it was playing the results, though, right? Like if SMU or who else was up for that in that range, it was like SMU or somebody else.
I mean, I guess you could have left Indiana. You could have left Indiana.
If they would have played more competitive first round games, do you think people wouldn't have been crying as much? But yeah, the fact that SMU couldn't complete a downfield pass against Penn State is the reason why Alabama should have gotten in. Like, I don't know.
If we're using the first round of the playoff to prove anything, it's that 8 might be the right number and not 12. How about the
fact that we're going to 16 is insane.
And I guess so I guess there's the question of, like, is this all in service to what happened last year with the selection, but also do you get the sense the goal is maybe not just humans picking the playoff committee, but also something more akin to the BCS with formulas and algorithms playing a role? Because I remember that being pretty unpopular too for most of its existence.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that, like, I know Kirby Smart brought that up specifically with, like, look at how they do it with baseball and softball using RPI and stuff like that.
I mean, heck, basketball takes the net. I mean, you look at the team sheets that the NCAA selection committee has. It's a whole lot of data. It's a whole lot, and it's not purely we put you there because of where you are in net, but man, it is heavily affected, and it just feels like there's nothing like that in college football. Like, you could look at like SP Plus, and you could look at ESPN's thing, which they'll probably will do, because I love Bill Connolly to death. He is an employee of ESPN though, so that seems. It is funny.
Scott Strickland made that exact point that there's not enough.
It is funny that they still have a football power index when they literally have Bill Connolly on their staff. I've never understood that. But yeah, like, does there need to be more data for that? Like, and I think if you put in any sort of data, like, at least make it transparent. Like, I don't understand everything that goes into the net for college basketball, but we know a lot of the components and we know what makes sense when teams move up and down in the net.
The thing that I struggle with, because this was something Kirby Smart said specifically, and Greg Sankey talked about it too, where, Kirby was talking about like we need to do what's best for the game. But I just am not convinced if you're in the SEC right now that you're really making an argument that in your heart of hearts you feel like is good for the entire game. Now we're
Yeah.
already at a point where we've basically annexed the Pacific side of the country. I mean, like because the Pac-12 is not around anymore, and I mean, I go back to a conversation, Dan. I don't know if you remember this. I think it was from last SEC Media Days. We were talking about after Florida State had been left out. It's like, when they argue about like records and stuff like that, like I almost feel like they just want to like fire up NCAA and all right, we're gonna see what the top overall teams are on this game, and that's the number we want to go with. Like, talking about like an Alabama and an Ole Miss, both of whom, lost late in the season. Yeah, I think there was some naivete for like me and some people when they expanded the playoff of being like, I remember our discussions with some of the folks on the Auburn beat where it's like, okay, if we're arguing about teams that have lost multiple games, I really hoped that the argument would kind of go out the window. It's like, well, you shouldn't have lost multiple games in a
Yeah.
season. You don't have a true case to be in the
I,
playoff.
I said it recently, Jordan. I don't like the fact that we have gotten to a point in college football where a season that would have gotten you in the Peach Bowl is enough to make you play for the national championship. Like that's, to me, that is insane. And it's kind of like along the lines of when they're talking about expanding the NCAA tournament. It's like, do we need more Texases from last season? Like, I know North Carolina went nuts in that play-in game, but like, do we need more of that? Because you're watering down your product, and also it just warps everybody that, okay, we've gotten to this point where it's playoff or bust. But if we make the playoff big enough where it's going to come to a point where making the playoff doesn't even really matter, If Alabama would have made the playoff last season, like I said the other day on the radio, like everybody in Alabama was upset about that season, and yet, a few months later, it's like, well, we should have made the playoff. Come on now.
Making the 68 didn't save the Texas men's basketball coach.
No.
Got fired by and then got replaced by the guy who eliminated him from the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated, like you just said, Ferg, of like how fan bases will look at certain seasons. But if you make the playoff, I think most Tennessee fans would say last season was still a success. But like, is getting to the playoff and getting dominated by Ohio State, is that enough to be a successful season? And then again, like we're going to see this field expand. And that's definitely when it comes to the basketball thing, hearing that conversation brought up last week, it just makes me so mad. We do not need more teams. But it's like, if that expansion happens, like I look at a team like Georgia, you got to make the tournament. Like there's no other like, well, like no, they expanded it, make it every year, and anything less is just unacceptable because they're expanding it. They're not expanding it to get these mid majors in. They're expanding to get as many SEC teams in as they can.
Yeah, no, they're not doing it because Indiana State didn't make it 2 years ago.
Yeah, the Big 12 coaches and the SEC coaches don't think NCAA tournament expansion is a good idea because they're like, oh man, this will be great for the Colonial, right? The Ohio Valley's gonna get more teams in, and the Sun Belt.
We dream of a 2-bid SoCon.
No, that's not what's happening. And I think Jordan's absolutely right that once the football tournament gets to 16. Honestly, we're going to be approaching that sort of what you fear the world where November becomes all about the bubble in the college football season, and it's like, oh, we've got 7 wins, we're still in the hunt for the.
Yeah, I've been mad at Dan all year for his hypothetical of Auburn this season being 8-3 going into the Iron Bowl and being a bubble team for the college football playoff. And my argument has just been like, it would be if Auburn's 8-3 going in the Iron Bowl, it is a step forward. It is a good season. It is exactly what Hugh Freeze needs to cool off a lot of the talk around him and the pressure that's on him at this point. But like, is that team ready to compete for a national championship? Well, in this day and age, probably. But like, I hate that that's right. I hate that like, for Auburn, it would be like this season, if they got to 8 wins, if they got to 8-4, the reward should be, hey, you took a step forward, now go play in a bowl game and see if you can get back to relevancy. Not, hey, you made it to 8-4 or 9-3. Here's here's a matchup in the first round against a team that's like firing on all
You're
cylinders.
kind of
or something like
describing
that.
Mike Elko's first season, aren't you? Like, I
Yes.
mean, he was 8-2 when they came to Auburn,
Yeah.
and it's like they're thinking SEC championship and playoff, and it turns out to be an 8-4. But it's a step forward
Yeah,
in year
it's a good
one
year.
for that.
It was a really really good year, and I think we should be able to normalize. And look, I'm of the opinion that if you're Auburn, like you should set your sights higher than like just making a bowl game. Now, obviously, having a winning season because you've had 4 in a row that you haven't had a winning season, that is you needed to make that progress. But like, I'm all for Auburn being able to look around and say, hey, we should be able to contend most years. However, I'm not at the point where we lower the bar of what contention looks like, you know? And also, we can normalize, like, just normalize having a really, really good season and being able to say, hey, we won 9 or 10 games and we feel like we're good, moving forward without it having to be, well, we didn't have our shot to play for the national championship. Well, if you're at that point, you lost to multiple teams, and odds are they're all not making the playoff either. So, Jordan, the other thing I wanted to ask you specifically about spring meetings is our annual debate about conference scheduling. And it felt like a few weeks ago we talked about it on a podcast about because it happened like right before it was reported right before we started recording that the SEC could be going to 9 games because ESPN was going to pay more for that inventory, and it was going to be that was going to be the step in the right direction. Then you flash forward to Destin, and it's like the first, and I'm not paying the closest amount of attention to this because I'll be very honest. When people get in the weeds about like business and ADs and stuff like that, I just kind of zone out because that's not my game. I'm not interested in that stuff. There are people who are really, really good at reporting and writing about that are great. It's just not something I'm interested in. But the first thing I really see when I like scrolling through is Greg Sankey going, well, if we stay at 8, we could still protect the Auburn-Georgia and Alabama, Tennessee. And I'm like, what are we doing at this point? So what is the latest on the great schedule debate, the 8 versus 9, and kind of where the SEC stands right now? Because, again, here we are at the end of another spring meetings, and there's been no real clarity on what's going to happen moving forward.
Yeah, there was no answer given on what they're going to do, and I think that is something they want to get determined and decided sooner rather than later because, just getting ready for, what the football schedule will look like, especially, as they get ready to finalize that playoff format. Just based on everything I've heard and some of the reporting, I know the Athletics' Seth Emerson reported about this a few weeks before uh, spring meetings. I think it's going to get to 9 games. I think that, very simply, ESPN's going to pay them some more money and they're going to be willing to do that. But I do think a piece of it too, like I mentioned a little earlier, I think what's ultimately going to happen with the next playoff format is you'll have those 5 automatic bids. And that I think having some of that factored in is going to make the SEC more willing to go ahead and do 9 conference games. And I think if they get their way too with what we were talking about sort of changing the criteria that the committee goes by, if they can convince the decision makers to really care about strength of schedule where, maybe 2 losses for a team doesn't ding them as badly if they play a top 5 schedule. I did find that really interesting that Sankey brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
He had been asked about, if the SEC was willing to see sort of those secondary rivalries like Georgia, Auburn, Tennessee, Alabama go away. And he said, basically they have models that can protect those rivalries. And he was asked, like, how old are these rivalries? And he was, like the models to save the rivalries. And he basically was like, oh, they're not new. So it's just something they've kind of like held in their back pockets, like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, we could have always protected these rivalries. So I think at the end of the day, the discussion is not new of like, yeah, if they can make more money, they'll keep these rivalries and expand to a 9 game conference schedule. I don't know how soon they'll make that decision. I do think that they want some more clarity from the selection committee,
Okay.
from what the playoff model will look like. I think they're going to go to 9. I think the most interesting thing now is to see there was discussion about an alliance with the Big Ten and seeing the SEC and the Big Ten play each other because now those are the two top conferences. So you have that on top of the conference schedule, making sure that those top teams play each other and play quality opponents. That's sort of what I'm watching. Obviously, want to see if we get to that 9-game schedule, and I'd expect they do the 3-6 model where you protect the three opponents. But I want to see if they follow through with the talk about scheduling with the Big Ten, because it's actually something I'm kind of excited about. I think those
That
would
would be
be,
fun.
yeah, I think they would be some really entertaining non-conference games, and you make sure that both conferences don't get out of non-conference play not having played anybody.
There was also talk, and there's been talk in the past of expanding the conference championship game Saturday to maybe include other teams. And I know this maybe goes along with the SEC needing automatic qualifiers and guaranteed spots in the playoff. But has that talk quieted down, the notion of SEC championship game Saturday becoming, expanding to
the Mortal Kombat ladder?
Yeah, to maybe you have 2 versus 7 or 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5 with 1 and 2 already sitting out.
I love when we can invent. I love when we can invent things that have never existed in any other sport ever. Think about how many sports and how many leagues there are in the world, and no one does that. No one does what they're projecting right now. Like, all right, we have automatic bids to the playoffs, but as we get it, we'll have this team play this team and this team play this team, and also there's a championship game that weekend. But those teams are already in. Like, no, that's just
you get the
so
sense
silly.
You get the sense the coaches don't like that idea either, because you don't want to. I mean, if you're the third best team in the SEC, you don't want to lose your playoff spot on conference championship game Saturday to the 6th or 7th best team in the SEC, because that's the way, that's the model they've chosen to decide who goes to the postseason.
Yeah, I think it was a situation where there was a lot of discussion and there was a lot of throwing out ideas, but I think, at least for the time being, the conference championship game is going to stay as is. And like, there is a piece of me that sort of understands why we're at least talking about that, because I think the SEC understands that, the two teams that are going to meet in the conference championship are going to be, playoff caliber teams, and most likely going to be in the playoff every single year. You kind of beat up on each other for 60 minutes, or like last season, Georgia and Texas went into overtime, and then you try to go in the playoff and try to kind of build off of that and move past that. Where also, I mean, I think the biggest reason this is a discussion point is probably from the coaches, where, I think about years where you have that third team that didn't play in the SEC championship game, but they are going to make the playoff. I think about a few years ago, Tennessee wound up not being in that situation because they lost to South Carolina, but it was like, oh, Tennessee might have really lucked up by not winning their division, because now they don't have to play that extra game and they go in and will have a little bit more momentum. And I guess, Tennessee was the example last season, although that didn't work out against Ohio State. I think the game's going to stay as is, at least for the time being. I know there will be a game. There's too much money involved with that weekend for it to just totally go away. If they changed it, I feel like what would be most likely is the number one team in the conference basically gets a bye and doesn't play, and you have the 2 versus the 3. I just don't know that they would make multiple games and have a semifinal into a final, because I think the piece that I keep coming back to is we talk about how physical this sport is, and I just can't really wrap my head around adding game after we've already expanded it to, a 15-game season.
Yeah.
I think they got to be really careful if they're talking about adding even more games, because, if I was someone involved on the player side, I'd be like, look, we got to cut a regular season game or something, because we got to take care of our bodies throughout, again, a season that is longer than it's ever been before.
I will say this, though. If they are going to continue to expand how long this season is, at least these guys are getting paid, finally. Like, that to me was one of the big problems I had with the playoff and the conference expansion and all this stuff, or I guess playoff expansion mostly, back when these guys weren't getting anything. And NIL is one thing, and NIL obviously morphed into you're getting paid by the school, you're just doing it in a roundabout way. Now it's going to be kind of direct, and it's like, okay, even though, yes, you guys are saying football is a brutal sport. I mean, before we started recording, I don't know, Dan, if you've seen this, Frank Ragnow just retired. Dude is 3 years younger than me. He's retiring from the NFL. He's one of the best centers in football, was dominant at Arkansas. I remember watching him at Arkansas and how good he was. He's stepping away from football because he's just broken down at this point. And so if you're earlier in your career, you don't want to like zap these guys' ability to make money down the road because of it. But if you are, A, they know the risk, and B, they're getting compensated for the risk. Like that, to me, is better than if we were doing this in the old model. If we were still acting like amateurism was a thing and these guys were playing 16-game seasons, it's insane. It would just be absolutely insane to make them do that. But, you know, at least we have that kind of, you know, sticking with us right now. I do like, let's go back to the SEC and the Big Ten thing, because I still think the end game of all of this is we have a mega SEC, we have a mega Big Ten, and they just do their own thing in football. And we can figure out what happens with basketball and all the other sports, you know, later. But like this is where we're AFC NFC model is
Super League.
Yeah, as people have talked about. But the idea that they could play against each other every year and kind of continue to consolidate their own power while also, you know, making for some fun games, that, you know, it used to be the SEC and the Big Ten really only cross paths in those January Florida bowl games, right? And I am just thinking about it, just kind of spitballing. The league's huge now, obviously, and I don't really count, as good as they are, I don't really count Oregon and Washington and USC and those teams as Big Ten teams. But I think about it, like, if
and there's Ohio State, Texas on opening day this year.
Sure,
but I think that, I mean, first of all, that might have been scheduled before Texas was an SEC team.
I would love. I mean, even if we're going to do a thing where it's kind
Oklahoma and Michigan play this year too. You have both those rivalries.
You know, Jordan, like, I don't know if this has been discussed specifically, kind of the details of it. Do you see it, or what do you think? Is this more of like, hey, go schedule these teams on your own? Like, if Auburn wanted to, and my dream is, if Auburn wanted to have a home and home with Wisconsin, you know, or Auburn wanted to have a home and home with Iowa, a team they've never played before in football, you know, they could just go do it. Or is it more like what we see in basketball with the SEC and ACC challenge now, where, hey, we're going to hand you a game, you know, you ain't going to know what it is, but we're going to try to stack the best possible matchups, you know? Like this season, yes, Ohio State and Texas playing against each other would be big, but like, you know, South Carolina had a really good season last season. People are really excited about them with their quarterback and all, and just the step forward they made last year. Maybe they get to play a bigger, you know, Big Ten team because of it, instead of just like, you know, having to play Northwestern or somebody like that. So, was there any talk, or is it just kind of all preliminary, like what direction they would want to go? Just say, hey, go do this on your own, or no, let's step in and make this kind of a thing, kind of borrowing from what has been a very successful basketball model?
I think it's really preliminary, and the sense I got was basically, I know Brian Kelly came out and said he wanted to see that happen, to see the SEC play Big Ten teams. Shane Beamer did as well, Sam Pittman, and the thing to me is that part of the discussion I think was brought up to Greg Sankey was basically, do you guys know how the Big Ten feels about this? And I don't know that I've ever seen an answer from the Big Ten side on what they think. So
because the Big Ten, real quick, because the Big Ten, somebody made this point on Twitter, the Big Ten had their spring meetings a couple of weeks ago, and like no one talks about anything that happens there. Like it just happens. They just have meetings and they move on. The SEC, it's an event because everything the SEC does is an event.
See, I wonder if there'd be an appetite for something league-wide like that, because you have rivalries like Florida State, and South Carolina Clemson, and Georgia Tech too. Like, I don't know if South Carolina would want to play a 9-game SEC schedule and Clemson and a Big Ten team as part of their 12-team football.
Well,
like I wonder, as opposed to if you're an Auburn or an Alabama and you don't play an ACC team every year, maybe a Big Ten team as your big non-conference opponent. You know, if they could expand the way, you know, if they could make that easier and more. I mean, Alabama and Wisconsin play this year.
Well, we have Jordan on here, and Jordan covers Georgia, which is a team that plays Tech every year, but has also continued to schedule tough on top of that. Is the thought that Georgia would continue to do that in a nine-game SEC schedule as well? Like, say all of this we've been talking about is happening, like, would Georgia look at it and say, heck yeah, we'll play 11 power conference teams. We don't have a problem with that at all.
I think they'd be willing to. I'd be curious if this got into a further discussion what Kirby Smart would say about it. But yeah, to your point, I mean, 3 years ago they opened the season with Oregon, then a Pac-12 team. Back before we totally lost our minds and totally changed the way the conferences were shaped. I will say, it's sort of been like in every other year that they have a really good non-conference opponent besides Georgia Tech. But I think if everybody was sort of playing by those same rules, Georgia would be down for that. And part of the discussion when we got Kirby Smart last week, he was asked, the 9 game conference schedule was brought up, and he was asked if he thought we would see fewer examples of Georgia Clemson, which was played last year, or Ohio State and Texas, and he really thinks we'll see more. And he pointed to the two things that I think have a lot of value in the equation. He said because of the TV
Yeah.
deals and because of fans, because fans want to see those big non-conference games. And the thing that he said too that I thought was interesting when it came to the 8 game schedule or the 9 game schedule. Kirby was kind of talking about what it means for the playoff, and he was like, "What do you think had more value for the SEC last season? Was it Georgia beating Clemson like they did in non-conference play, or would an additional SEC game for everybody have had more value?" He said, "I think that Clemson game said a lot about where Georgia was at the start of the year, and then for the bigger picture, the SEC's strength." So I think Georgia will be down
Hmm.
to play one of these Big Ten teams. I'm fascinated to see if this comes to pass, who it would be. And I'd ask you too. You mentioned Wisconsin. If this does happen, who would you guys want to see Auburn play? And the biggest thing for me, just period, if they do this, please do these on campuses.
Yes.
I have the
Yes.
worst. I have the worst feeling in the world. These will be neutral site games just because of the money. I am begging the athletic directors and the coaches play these games on campus because it will be so much more enjoyable if that happens.
I've said Wisconsin because for me selfishly, I'm thinking about what trips I would like to take, game weekends, and I've always wanted to go to Madison. I've always heard great things about Madison, so Wisconsin's always been the one that sticks out to me. I mentioned Iowa. Auburn had never played Iowa in football or men's basketball until they played in the NCAA tournament a couple years ago. They've never played Iowa. Iowa would be interesting.
I don't really care if it's like a traditional Big Ten team. I think Nebraska would be fun. I think
Nebraska would be
I
fun.
think either of the Los Angeles schools would be fun. I know some
I mean,
fans
they
remember
backed,
that
didn't they back out of the UCLA
backed
series?
out of the UCLA series when the conference realignment happened. And I know, I mean, of course, there was a USC series in the early 2000s. There was, Auburn played Oregon and Washington in neutral site games in the last decade, but didn't go on campus with either of those teams. I think those would be exotic but fun trips.
Yeah, Oregon would be fun
in football. Minnesota, PJ Fleck and the Gophers could be a fun.
It is an interesting. Like there are a lot of interesting ones there. You don't want to necessarily do. You just did Penn State not too long ago, so you wouldn't want to bark up that tree again. But
it's so much fun for. I mean, as thinking about last year's Oklahoma game. And the fact that Auburn's going to make a return trip to Norman for the first time ever, like when two teams that have been at the top level, when you're talking about the top 20, 25, 30 programs ever in this sport, when they're playing each other on campus for the first time, it's a real adventure. And Auburn, Auburn could you have, especially if you expand to the schedule to some of these Big Ten teams that you've never seen before. Auburn could have some you could have some more games like that. In the future, potentially, probably not conference games like the Oklahoma game was, but games that are memorable, like that Penn State game, like the Oklahoma game from last year.
Jordan, I would ask you the same thing for Georgia. My first thought for Georgia is, Ohio State makes a ton of sense because they're a powerhouse, but like
Oregon because of Lanning, I think would be fascinating.
Well, they just did one of those,
yeah.
Georgia Michigan stands out to me. I just think Georgia Michigan would be a lot of fun. Also, especially in your household, Georgia Michigan would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, somebody would be sleeping on the couch with my wife being a Michigan grad. I mean, the two that you guys just mentioned, because I wrote about this after the talk kind of popped up, like, hey, who some of the teams would make sense for Georgia? I think Ohio State and Oregon. I could really see, at least just from the narrative perspective of college football, trying to get a Saban versus Kirby like we had, and that being Kirby versus Dan Lanning. And the first time they played, it was a blowout, but that was literally Dan's first game. I think that Oregon is in a much better place now. And
it was Bo's first game. At Oregon too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's Auburn fans taking a victory lap over that one.
How'd that turn out?
Did not age well. Did not age well at all. Just right, Georgia Penn State. Penn State home and home would be a lot of fun.
The anybody but Bo movement really went into a ditch.
Yeah.
How many schools has TJ Finley been at since that discussion?
Oh man, but Georgia Penn State, I think that would be a whole lot of fun. I don't know how often they've played each other, but that's a helmet game right there. Those are two like really big traditional programs, like powerhouses.
And I would shout out a team that Dan mentioned a few minutes ago in USC. I don't think Georgia USC have played since like 1960, and that's not obviously a traditional Big Ten team, but I think that would be a really fun series, especially if we see kind of a bounce back with USC this year. This feels to me like a big year for Lincoln Riley.
Yeah.
If they kind of assert themselves as a team that can really contend, that to me that would be very fun. USC and Georgia,
and then Tennessee, UCLA, if we're doing it next year, right? For the after the quarterback trade, like you let those two teams play each other.
Run it.
Might be a little bit too late, for any of the people involved to see the field if this is the thing you're doing down the road. But yeah, Georgia USC would be
USC would be a lot of fun.
Good call.
Would be a lot of fun. All right, Jordan, spring meetings. Anything else pop up to you that we haven't hit on yet that kind of sticks out? Was there any talk or any chatter whatsoever about, because it was coming at around the same time, about the NCAA tournament expansion? If that had been kind of addressed or talked about by Sankey or maybe any of the basketball coaches who were down in Destin?
Yeah, I didn't really hear anything in Destin about it. I think it might have been the NCAA's president who sort of kind of got that conversation going. I took notes for this. I really feel like anytime in today's college athletics, I almost feel like I'm in a communication law class. Like I just take notes of like what needs to be discussed. The only other things I can think of, I think we hit on the biggest things. It seems like the SEC is down for, I don't know if you guys have talked at all about there's talk of implementing a college sports commission that's basically going to enforce the House settlement and basically make sure everybody's playing by the same rules, going between, keeping everything between the guardrails and making sure that
outside of the NCAA,
yes.
Correct. Like this would be kind of a thing for, because the NCAA, as toothless as it is, the NCAA still has to run Division III and Division II and protect the FCS and some of the other the smaller conferences. This would kind of be a for the big dogs only type of commission, right?
Correct. And the biggest thing, it lets the NCAA worry about things like eligibility and things like that. Kind of takes that off the NCAA's plate. That was a point of a lot of conversation going into spring meetings because we were coming off the heels of the state of Tennessee passing a bill that was basically like, look, I will read it verbatim because I knew I didn't want to misquote it, but it was like, the state of Tennessee, athletes in the state of Tennessee can receive compensation from NIL collectives until explicitly told otherwise by federal law, antitrust law, or a valid court order. And I put in here that you'll notice that the NCAA or this commission are not part of that enforcement list. And so I know that
they literally are like, unless the feds show up, we're gonna be moving this cash.
And there were some people in the conference who I will not name that were not happy about that being part of the conversation. But based on what Greg Sankey said toward the end of the week was everybody's on board with agreeing to this commission. And that goes back to something that was said in Georgia's last Athletic Association board meeting. UGA's president, Jerry Moorhead, who's on the NCAA Board of Governors, he's like, yeah, we all want to be part of this commission. We all agreed to the settlement. So that means we should all abide by what is in the settlement. So I thought that was big, that it seems like everybody's on the same page. Now, we are going to have to see probably in this next year just how it's enforced, how strictly it's enforced. They're going to have the clearinghouse to look at these NIL deals, and I'm sure that there's going to be people. I compared it to Jurassic Park, with the raptors testing the fence, because there's going to be people that try to step over the line. I want to see, how strictly it's enforced.
I just had this thought pop into my head is I would love to, and it's not going to happen, I don't think, but I would love to see a team, a school, just be like, you know what? We don't really care about any of this. And what we're going to do instead is we are going to build a team. We're going to have a football team that can play by their own rules. We don't have to listen to this commission or the NCAA. We can pay these kids whatever we want, however we want, no matter what. We'll build this super team, and then oh, we don't need a national championship. We're just gonna if you get I don't know who would do this. Who would be really Texas would have made sense for this when they still had their own network. Notre Dame kind of makes sense for this, but it would be against Notre Dame's whole vibe. But just kind of come out and say BYU would be hilarious for this. You would just come out and say, you know what? We're going to do whatever we want. We are going to play. Whoever wants to come play us can come play us. We don't care about competing for a national championship. We're just going to go sell out our own state. We're going to sell out our stadium and basically have not quite like the Globetrotters, but
Savannah Bananas of college football,
or just
if you're taking yourself out of the running for the postseason, right? Sort of by doing it
you're kind of like
and the game.
We want to just be. We just want to be an awesome football product for the glory of our university.
And the game.
And we don't really care about your rules or your bylaws. Like an outlaw all-star team. One school just being you know what? We're going to try to sell out our stadium every week. Whoever wants to come play us can come play us. We're going to put dudes in the league. We're going to pay them a ton. We're going to get all this stuff. And you know what? You can't tell us what we have to do.
The teams that play them though, that wouldn't, the game presumably wouldn't count in the records.
See, I don't know how that would work.
And if if guys got injured in that game, I don't know. It does.
I just look because again, what made me think of that was Tennessee. Because if Tennessee was just you know what? We're gonna do whatever we want unless you got a warrant. That's the I would love to see a team just be you know what, and I guess maybe basketball would fit a little bit better because you could really do. It would kind of be like what Cal was trying to do at Kentucky, where it was just let's get the best guys we can get together, and who cares if we win a championship? We're just gonna play really really fun basketball, put dudes in the league, and we'll see what happens, from there. But it would be hilarious if a team just went full outlaw mode and just you know what. We're not under your guidance. You can't tell us what to do.
If SMU had been left
we're going to pay this kid $20 million to come and throw 50 touchdowns a season for us, and you can't do anything about it.
If Bama had gotten in instead of SMU, then SMU would have been the program that did this, right?
Yes.
That. It would have turned SMU into the Joker. And
SMU would have been A, we're already used to being outlaws. B, we're not even in a real conference right now. It doesn't make sense that we're in the ACC. So why don't we just go break off and do our own thing? We're private. We can
open the jet.
We got to talk about Miami. I've been dying to say it. It's gotta be Miami.
That's a good call.
Miami would be incredible. Where they're you know what? People don't actually show up for these games anyway.
Miami and SMU can be like the bananas and the party animals, right? Where it's they're going to play, they're going to play a couple times a year.
I taught myself into this idea for football, and now I've gotten even more into I love a basketball idea for this, where you just that team could play college basketball teams, could play pro teams. They could if they wanted to play Real Madrid in a series, they could. If they go play a EuroLeague team or a G League team or a indie ball team. Yeah,
a little related to what we're talking about. Gottlieb's trying to get his team in the TBT. There's talk that why can't an active NCAA team over the summer play in TBT?
I would love to see Gottlieb's really bad college basketball team getting waxed by a glorified pickup team in the TBT. Anything else spring meetings wise, Jordan, that you want to get to before we move on to a little bit more? I wanted to ask Jordan a bit about his team of interest because obviously they're a big Auburn rival. Anything else?
Only other thing is that they want an answer on the transfer portal, and the SEC is really pushing for, specifically with football, just one window. I know Kirby Smart
too much sense.
Yeah, Kirby Smart has talked about doing it in January. He brought up that he had complained in the past about still competing when that window is open, and he said during the meeting that he was told, quote, "There's no crying from the yacht." End quote. But he talked about that's just going to make the most sense to do it in January as opposed to doing it in April. And, you've already gone through spring practice and you're trying to figure that out. So
even basketball has that problem. Auburn got Keyshawn Hall while they were marching towards the Final Four.
Yeah, he asked the media like what it looked like for basketball, and that was brought up that the portal opens basically when the NCAA tournament starts. So I don't know how soon they are looking at a decision there. And it was brought up, I thought, really wisely by Pete Thamel in the room. He asked Kirby like, "I'm not pushing back. I literally want guidance. Who is going to implement like what when the portal is?" And Kirby pointed to there is a House Settlement Implementation Committee basically coming out of the settlement, which, as
Mm,
we record this, has still not been approved.
yep.
So we're still kind of waiting to see when that is. But it's a committee of 10 athletic directors spread across the country, legal and compliance teams from across the country, too. He pointed to them as the people he thought would be the ones that need to implement when the portal is. So, again, no clear answer on that. Obviously, we got two windows right now, but the SEC sure sounds like they want it to be limited to one window and for it to happen in January. I don't know that there's a great answer, but I think that's probably the best situation, especially, I think if you can limit people leaving your team after spring practice, to me, that makes the most sense.
All right, Jordan, while we have you here, I wanted to ask you about Georgia, both football and men's basketball at this point in the offseason. Auburn will obviously play Georgia this season in football, and they will play Georgia twice in basketball if things continue to go as they should go. Let's start with football. It feels like Georgia, kind of like Alabama, is really fascinating that everyone thinks they're a top 5 team. They're really, really good because of how they recruit and just the you get the benefit of the doubt when you're awesome pretty much every year. But to me, not knowing all the ins and outs of this Georgia roster yet, it might just be because the quarterback's such the big issue, but like it feels like there's a lot more question marks about Georgia heading into this season than usual. However, everyone expects them to still be really, really good. From your perspective, like what is the outlook right now at this point? When we're in June, we'll be playing football in a couple months of this Georgia team and kind of where they stand right now, knowing that there are, people have questions, but they don't really have teams that are better than them at this point. Like, it's like we can all sit back and question Georgia and Alabama. But we can all say, all right, well, who's going to be definitively better than them in the conference?
Yeah, that's always the challenge any off season is, especially when you cover a specific team. You know all the ins and outs of that team, but sometimes you're trying to kind of keep a level head of like, okay, well, this is what Texas lost and this is what Alabama lost. I mean, the thing with Georgia, Georgia's kind of making it pretty simple this year. I mean, there's a lot of different guys they need to step up, but to me, it's as simple as saying I think they go as far as Gunnar Stockton takes them. I
Mm-hmm.
think that they've done a really good job on offense of retooling. Guys, this might have been the worst receiver core I've ever seen at Georgia last year. They were terrible. They led the country in drops. They had more drops than UAB did last year, and they retooled it. Did a great job. They went and got Zachariah Branch from USC. I'm convinced he's going to be Georgia's leading receiver. I was really impressed by him in the spring. But they got Noah Thomas, who led Texas A&M in receiving last year.
Good
Colby
player.
Young is back. They got Dylan Bell back for another year. They've still got Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky at tight end. So I think it's a lot on what Gunner does. They've done a good job at running back. They went and got Josh McCray from Illinois, an enterprise kid. So got to
Mm,
shout out Josh McCray, and Nate Frazier will be the lead back. If Gunner plays well and if the offensive line in front of him, they're going to be breaking in 4 new starters. But I
yeah.
do feel good about what they've got on the interior. They need the 2 tackles to really step up. I think the offense can be really explosive. And then the other side of the ball, I mean, I think as much as they've lost, they have shown year after year that they can reload, pretty easily. I mean, and that's a credit to how they recruit and how they go and obtain talent. But, if they can have some of the guys on the defensive line step up, because the point I've kind of made all off season, Georgia's 2 best defenses in 21 and 22, they had that guy in the middle
Yeah,
that you
yeah. I
just
was going to ask you about that. Do they feel like they have that guy? Because I remember talking to you about them maybe the last couple seasons where I was like, all right, where is the Jordan Davis on this team?
Yeah, I think there is a prime candidate. It's just he's going to have to rise to the occasion. It's Christian Miller. He's a guy that played quite a bit last season, a guy that deserves a ton of credit. He got hurt against UMass in November, and he winds up playing. I think he missed the Texas game, the SEC championship game. But he comes back against Notre Dame with definitely not 100%. I think he had 5 tackles. So to me, it's Christian Miller. He's the defensive tackle. And then the nose tackle probably beside him is going to be Jordan Hall, a guy that was a 5-star coming out of Jacksonville. And, last season just could not stay healthy, but had a really good spring. So when I look at what Georgia's got, pretty comfortable at cornerback, absurdly deep at inside linebacker. I really don't know how they maintain that much talent at inside linebacker at a time where guys can just leave to go play elsewhere. They need someone to step up at safety opposite KJ Bolden, but I think it all on the defensive side. The defensive line just needs somebody in the middle to really step up. I think Christian Miller has a really good chance to do that. And if they dominate up front, I mean, their best defenses were just relentless against the run. I mean, I think it was a 21 defense, only gave up 2 rushing touchdowns all year. I don't know if you can replicate that, but if you can be that stout, I think you're set up to have a lot of success on defense and, by proxy, just as an entire team.
Jordan, you mentioned that there's some new starters on the offensive line. A familiar name, looks like he could be part of a pretty big part of the Georgia offensive line this year, and that's a former Auburn commitment Drew Bobo, right? A local guy, Auburn High School kid for part of his career. What can you say about his role on the team going into this season?
Yeah, Drew Bobo, a guy I covered back at the Opelika Auburn News, excited to see him not only get to Georgia, but he's done a great job. And when he came over, Mike Bobo had joined Georgia as an analyst, and all the fans were like, "Well, of course, look at coach's son getting a scholarship."
Oh, we heard it too. I mean, when he was, because Mike Bobo was at Auburn when Drew was committed to play here, and folks were skeptical. Because it was a guy going to play for his dad.
Yeah, and he's done a good job of biding his time. He deserves a ton of credit. Last season, the starter Jared Wilson gets hurt against Alabama. Drew Bobo comes in for just like a play, and then Jared comes back. But then the next 2 games, Jared is out, and Drew Bobo played fantastic, especially for a guy who had not really gotten any meaningful playing time before that. And, I think that there was consideration of maybe we should just leave Drew Bobo out here. I think that last year's offensive line, along with Carson Beck, probably the 2 most disappointing things for Georgia last season. And the communication was just really off with that offensive line for most of the year. And just based on what I heard behind the scenes and what folks were talking about, Drew Bobo really impressed with how good of a communicator he was at the center position. I mean, I think we as football fans take for granted how hard that position is.
Oh, yeah.
Just communicating pre-snap and then snapping the ball and then being able to block. I do think he's a guy that is a big part of why I think Georgia's interior is going to be in good shape this year. So we had a chance to talk to Drew during the spring, and I asked him what it's like, with his dad being Mike Bobo, who he was not very popular in Auburn, and I can tell you that there are a lot of Georgia fans who are not happy with him. And Drew says he's able to block it out, and he goes out there and plays, and he deserves a lot of credit. I think he's done a great job to this point in his playing career, and he'll be Georgia's starting center this year, and I think he has a chance to have a really good year.
All right, switching over to basketball, Auburn obviously had to retool pretty much their entire roster outside of Tahad Pettiford. But as I wrote on Monday at the Observer in the position by position breakdown, there's a lot of excitement about this team. I think they're going to be fascinating to watch with the speed and just kind of all the new pieces, how they fit together. Georgia, they make the step forward last season. They get to the NCAA tournament. Didn't go well for them once they got there, but they did make it there. They really, I thought, did a good job of kind of grinding it out through a season where the league was as brutal as ever. What is kind of the outlook for Georgia basketball heading into this season? They picked up some interesting names. They also lost some very good players, most notably Asa Newell going to the draft, but you knew that was coming. What's kind of the status right now, your outlook at this point here, as we're talking in early June about this Georgia basketball team in the arms race of what should be an SEC where pretty much everybody's hitting the reset button in one way or another?
You hit on the biggest thing. I'm just fascinated to see where this team stacks up because there was so much returning talent throughout the SEC last year, and now so many of those guys have moved on. So I think it is plausible for this team to be in the NCAA tournament hunt again. They're going to have big shoes to fill. Asa Newell going pro. Probably a bigger loss in my mind, Silas Demery Jr.
Yeah.
Transferring to
Mm.
UConn, which there had been talk after his freshman year that he may transfer. He decides to come back, had a fantastic end to his sophomore season. And, I can't really fault a guy for leaving and going to UConn. I mean, that I can understand that
Isn't he a
move. And
Northeast guy? Or where's
no,
it?
he's actually from North Carolina.
Oh,
So
okay.
because
All right.
there was a lot of discussion and prediction that Will Wade was going to get involved there, but he went to UConn
By the way, did
instead.
you see Will Wade got Van Allen
That's
looping
right.
after all that? Pretty wild. Auburn was in on him for a little bit before they got Jovic. So Demery leaving, but I thought Georgia. It looks like portal wise, I there's one really big name that they ended up getting that I think a lot of people are excited about, or at least that was kind of the headline making one. But it feels like Mike White continues to just go try to find value in those mid-major and smaller conference guys. Obviously, has done well with some of them throughout his career. How do you see them replacing Demery and obviously Asa Newell with what they're bringing back?
Yeah, so they went and added five guys from the portal and three guys from high school. Transfer guys, the biggest thing is going to be figuring out who's going to be the point guard now that Silas has left. I'd say Jordan Ross from St. Mary's is probably your best bet. Didn't have a great shooting year, but is a very good defender. And he was a guy, after watching this film, I thought it made a lot of sense as a starter. And then we talked to Mike White down in Destin, and just based on what he had to say, I think he will be your starter. But they got Smurf Millender from UTSA. So excited! Georgia's gonna have a Smurf and a guy named Blue
Yes.
on this next team. So I really hope that the student giveaways they take advantage of that. But Smurf will be in that competition for point guard. They bring back Blue Kane. They bring back Dylan James, and they go the biggest name as far as the portal. Cannon Catchings, a guy
Mm,
they got from BYU, a guy that going into his freshman year at BYU, people thought was going to be one and done.
yeah.
He's actually Tamika Catchings' nephew, if you remember
Oh
her
wow.
from the WNBA.
Yeah.
So he was very hit or miss at BYU, and I'm not sure what happened, but he kind of fell out of the rotation there
So BYU just
late.
loaded up, really. I mean, they're supposed to be awesome this season, even on top of the fact that they're bringing in AJ.
Right. So getting him, I think he's going to play a key part. They got Justin Bailey from Wofford. He's kind of going to be probably one of those first guys off the bench. Probably bigger than anything. They convinced Santo Surreal to stay, and he's a guy that I thought flashed a lot. Big dunks, and I
If
think
he can
he.
if he can cut down his turnovers, he's a great center in this league. The one thing I watched with him last season, it was just like there was one Auburn game specifically where I was like, they can't have him on the floor because it is a turnover or a mistake every time he's touching it. But defensively, he's a monster and he's a really really good dunker. I love him in that rim running role if he can develop. And then he's still young, but I mean the tools are off the charts for that dude. I really like his game a lot.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that, when he put the ball on the floor, you
Yeah.
kind of tensed up. But he's a guy that getting him back for another year was big, and I do think had he portaled, he would have had some good opportunities. He was a guy that was committed to Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
and then Calipari left for Arkansas, and he opened it back up. But getting him back, Justin Abson back,
I like
um,
Justin Abson. He played a little bit when you went to Boone.
Yes,
He was on the App State
he was
team. He
on
was
that
part
App
of that,
State team that beat Auburn. Yep.
and he's and he's now in his final year of college basketball. Because of Asa Newell, they didn't need him all that much in the front court, but he's a really useful piece. Like I think he's a dirty work for power forward center who can be more than that. I'd love to have him back if I were in Mike White's position.
Yeah, and I think that he's one of the best passing bigs I've ever seen. And they
Yes,
talked about that last season.
very
He's just
smooth.
got really good vision and is able to set up his teammates. So having that, and with the three freshmen that they signed, the guy I'm most interested in is Jacob Wilkins. And Jacob Wilkins, will be wearing number 21. And if you guys are familiar at all with Georgia basketball, that's Dominique Wilkins' number, and that's because Dominique Wilkins is his father. And Jacob Wilkins has got a heck of a highlight reel from his time at Grayson. He's a guy that I'm very fascinated to see how much he gets in the mix, especially early. Because Mike White made this point when we talked to him at spring meetings that this is a more experienced team on the whole compared to the one last year that made the NCAA tournament. He said that he expects them to play a little bit more small ball. I do think that this is going to be a team that plays differently than the one last year. I think that you're going to see more 3-point shooting, which is something Georgia struggled with mightily last year. Assist to turnover ratio is a big problem. Mike said that he expects his team to take care of the basketball better. So I think it's going to be a different brand of basketball than what we saw last year, which I honestly think is going to be a plus for Georgia. I think that they've got the pieces to be competitive, and I'm fascinated by the time we get to media day for basketball, just
Yeah.
seeing how people rank these teams, really just because I have no clue. There's so many questions, and when you talk about in the portal era of basketball, things change so drastically. But I do like the pieces Georgia added. If they, to me, the key guy, every time we go into a new season, I look at a guy to say, all right, if this guy has a big season, it will tell me how good Georgia will be. To me, it's Cannon Catchings. If
Mm-hmm.
he is one of their leading scorers and if he can live up to the really high expectations he had coming out of high school, I think if he has a really good season, Georgia will be in the tournament when it's said and done.
Yeah, I Cannon Catchings was the one that really stood out to me whenever they picked him up, and I know there was talk. I thought everybody thought that Georgia was going to get Darian Reed at one point, but they did do well outside. But yeah, I mean when you see, I mean it's part of the basketball family. It's part of the fact that he was an NBA draft guy early in his career, or a prospect early in his career. Yeah, I just Georgia we have seen in a lot of sports where these guys get a reset, and that second school is where they really tap into what they were, or what people expected them to be. So yeah, that was the one that when they landed him, I was like, ooh, that's fun because Mike White, I will always have questions about how that team's going to play offense, and just how they run things, but that under Mike White they're going to get developed and they're going to become good, sound basketball players. I'll give Georgia credit for that. They don't have a ton of knuckleheads playing for them under Mike White, where you run out there and you're like, I don't know what this guy's doing, or just oh, that guy got a lot worse there.
Yeah, well, Cannon Catchings, I was just going to say what Mike shared in Destin was, he's 6'9" and 6'10" and shoots it like a two guard. And again, if you can get that to work out and get that consistently, I mean, that'd be huge for Georgia this year.
All right, Dan, do we have a top four for Jordan that we can do? I know y'all want to talk a movie that I have not seen, so I'm gonna have to step back for that one.
Oh man,
I haven't seen it.
We'll see. Maybe you will. Maybe we can convince you to give it a shot. I don't know. It's tough, but yeah. Do you want to bring him in on one of the ones that we've done already? Do you want to do a new one for Jordan? I kind of would. I'd like to get Jordan's thoughts on. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about an observer box.
So we did a few of these in the mailbag episode last time out.
A 3-3-4, if you will.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. But okay, so we were. I'll give you two. Baseball's on the front of our minds. Obviously with Auburn.
Can we get his four favorite Braves?
Yeah, that's what I was going to go with. I want to give you. I want to. We'll do the ones that Dan and I did the other day. It was we did four favorite Braves a while back, and then your four favorite baseball players who didn't play for the Braves in their careers, or it could be guys who are currently playing right now.
We should mention Jordan, a Braves season ticket holder.
Yes, we share season tickets. Me and Jordan do. Now, has the team winning percentage decreased by 12% since we've gotten season tickets? Yes, absolutely. Are we the reason why they're falling apart? Potentially, but four favorite Braves. Four favorite non-Braves baseball players. Hit me.
Most of these are from when I was younger, but I'll go in order 4 to 1, 1 being my favorite. 4 is the only current player, Ozzie Albies. I just love the way Ozzie plays, and he's a big dog guy and always helping people rescue dogs and stuff like that. But big Ozzie guy, he's my favorite of the current. John Smoltz, who probably would have been higher on my list have I not had to listen to him broadcast baseball for the last 10 or 15 years. He's so negative, but I loved him. Like it was like when I really started watching the Braves regularly, he had come back from injury and was working more as a closer.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of cool just to see him sort of battle back from injury and wind up eventually became a starter again, but that was sort of the first I got to see.
Dan was wondering if you're going to pick John Rocker there.
Yeah.
Smoltz is the safe pick for the closer.
Yeah, for some reason Dan heard my voice and thought I was a big John Rocker guy. I don't know what that says about me, but
yeah.
But number 2, Andrew Jones. I mean, just was unbelievable when we were younger. I mean, I still really can't believe he's not in the Hall of Fame. I hope that behind Dale Murphy, like Dale, there's no case that Dale Murphy should not be in the Hall of Fame. But I think Andrew's got a strong one too. And then number 1, man, my favorite and the favorite of many wives in Buckhead and throughout the state of Georgia, Javi Lopez.
Javi Lopez.
So I was explaining this.
One of the great contract years ever.
Oh, good grief. So I was telling Jordan this the other day. We are at Mary Kate and I went to two of the Braves games this past weekend against the Red Sox, and they do a segment in like between innings. Between half innings where they'll like interview fans outside the stadium and they have like a question of the day that they ask them. And it's like, why are you a Braves fan? And so you'll have kids be like, oh, my dad's a Braves fan. He got me into it. Or, oh, hey, I'm from Atlanta. Or, TBS was a big one that people said. And then they cut to these like 2 middle-aged women and they were like, why are you a Braves fan? And both of them unanimously at the same time go, Javi Lopez. So Jordan and every middle-aged Southern woman in that had any remote interest in baseball, going with Javi as the top pick.
I will say just quickly, Javi was my favorite because when I was young, I was a catcher. So it's like, yeah, of course I'm going to really like the guy who catches for the Braves. But what was funny, Dan mentioned the contract year. So my mom's dad was a huge Braves fan, like the biggest Braves fan I knew, especially growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And after Javi left, he signs a big deal with the Orioles. And I feel like the year after he left, like the Braves were probably still pretty good. I can't remember if they won the division, but it was like I would go over there to their house quite a bit and watch Braves games. And anytime they lost, I would look at him and go, 2 words. Javi Lopez. Javi was the secret sauce, and they let him get away.
Javi's stats for the Orioles at the time probably didn't play. It's like the Braves fans who miss Dansby, right? So they're not looking at the stats in Chicago.
Nope.
They're just reminiscing about well, you guys had you had Brian McCann right after Javi. Maybe there's someone I'm skipping in between, but
I believe it. I believe it was Javi.
Johnny Estrada.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Almost forgot Johnny Estrada. It was on my list.
And how could you forget Johnny Estrada is the better question.
All right. Four favorite guys who never played for the Braves.
This one was tougher for me, and I feel like my list more looks like guys naming dudes. Just like, oh, remember this guy? So the top, number 4 on my list is the only current one, Shohei Ohtani. He's got to be on the list. He's just unreal. And even with him going for the team that my wife loves and I hate with every bit of my heart, I can't help but root for him and really appreciate what he does for baseball. He's so good. 3, Jim Edmonds. I always like watching Jim Edmonds out in center field. I'd probably go between him and Albert Pujols. Pujols would probably I'm making the switch. I'm going to go Pujols instead of Edmonds. But both those guys, those Cardinals, as much as the Cardinals kind of tormented the Braves over the years, I did always appreciate how good they were. And of course, you had Rafael Furcal in the mix there for a while. So I'll put Pujols at 3. One of the coolest things I've done covering sports, Pujols' last season when he was in St. Louis, and it was like, he's going to retire. Georgia was playing at Missouri, and so we caught a Cardinals game Friday night before the game on Saturday night, and I got to see a Pujols home run. I don't know how many more he hit after that, but like that was super cool to be able to say, that I got to see that. Number 2, Paul Konerko. I
Wow.
just I
Hey,
always
you and the Pope, big Canerco guys.
just always really enjoyed watching him. It seemed like he was a guy that, like, as we were younger, there were a few guys that I was like, man, it'd be really cool if the Braves could get like
Yeah.
him. Another guy that's not on my list, I always thought of Marlon Byrd. I was like, oh, this is a guy that might wind up
Wow.
with the
Okay.
Braves.
Yeah. We are naming
But
some dudes. Love a Marlon Bird shout out.
oh
All
yeah,
right.
but I always enjoyed Konerko, and he was a fun one. And number one,
Canerco would make my top 4 like White Sox first baseman. Right?
Adam LaRoche is
Yeah.
gonna be on that
With
list.
Frank Thomas and Adam LaRoche and Jim Thome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did want to shout out Tomey too. He didn't make my list, but I always
All right.
really liked
And Marlon
him,
Bird
too.
would be in my top 4 birds. Probably.
Paul Bird.
Yeah, I was gonna say Paul Bird's got to be on there.
All right. Number one.
Number one is Ichiro
Yep,
because
great one.
he was just so good, so consistent. I mean, just the way he hit, and I always enjoyed some of the stories about Ichiro around the game. I remember, when he was learning English, some of the stuff they taught him how to say which I will not share on the podcast. But Ichiro is just an all timer and just one of the
It's like
best
any
hitters that
Hideki
ever-
Matsui story. You just go like, all right, can't put that one on the air.
The bird that Randy Johnson hit. It's one of my top 4 birds in this.
I'm glad you mentioned some of those guys. I was thinking I didn't have him on my list when we were talking about it earlier, or when we did this list before. But I thought of one the other day that I was a really big fan of, and it's because we have the same birthday. And when I found out this fact, he was even cooler to me. I really liked Torrey Hunter growing up, and I don't know. I just defensive center fielders like I will always be a bit like I will always love Michael Harris. He could be in a slump. Although I did go to a game the other day where he had 3 hits, but I just like those center fielders that can do anything, like catching the ball. I think is among my favorites. All right, Jordan, we appreciate you jumping on as always. Thank you for giving us the insight from Destin and talking some SEC, talking some Georgia, talking some Auburn with us. The floor is yours to sell whatever you have to sell right now. Tell people how they can follow you and keep up with everything if they want to keep an eye on the dogs and other stuff going on in the SEC.
For sure. Also, I was going to shout out Alfonso Soriano. I feel like he would have been good on the list too.
40-40 guy.
Yeah. Dogs247.com, on Twitter at Jordan Davis Hill, on Twitter at Dogs247. If you're listening to this, if you're a Georgia fan, 60% off sale right now. And I always tell people when I come on here, if you subscribe here to Dogs247 or you subscribe over at Auburn Undercover, you can have access to our content. I always shout out Nathan King, Christian Clemente, Jason Caldwell, all of the folks over there, the job they do. So yeah, just getting ready. This is a time of year where you kind of got to get a little bit more creative with the stuff you're writing about after sort of the window between spring meetings and SEC media days. But a lot to write about. I'm going to start getting in on some profiles on some of the new guys coming in, and excited to learn the football team a little bit more as we get ready, because as hard as it is to believe, late August will be here before you know it, and we'll be getting ready for another big season.
Jordan, one of my favorite things about having you on the show is that you play along with the silly little podcast movie games that we do. And Jordan volunteered to bring in a movie from 1999.
By the way, before we begin, we are recording this on my computer, so yes, you just heard the Mac screenshot noise probably on it. Something popped up on my text message I popped up. So I'm not going to gaslight you into thinking that you didn't hear that. You probably heard that.
It was the text message from me about the John Rocker thing.
Actually. I did want to screenshot
it was
and send it to him, but then I completely forgot we were feeding into the mic. It was very professional podcast we run here. All right, so like you were saying, Dan.
So Jordan offered to watch a movie from 1999 again. If you've missed, I really enjoyed the discussion we had about Magnolia on an old episode. I forget when that was, but that was a lot of fun.
Wait, he did 99 again?
No, we didn't. I was talking about movies from the 70s, and I shouted out McCabe and Mrs. Miller, a Robert Altman Western with Warren Beatty from, I think, 1971, that I saw recently, and it just floored me. I didn't know anything about it except that it was Reportedly, it was kind of famously bleak for a Western. But it's just it packs a wallop, and I'd love to know I'd love to know what Jordan thought, because I believe Jordan recently watched McCabe and Mrs. Miller for the first time.
Yeah, I had actually never heard of it, and I will say, Dan, I am kind of disappointed we haven't just started going like to 2000, where like every year that I come on the podcast, we just move it a year up, and maybe that's something we can explore later. But no, I'd never seen McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and I kind of realized in watching this that I really haven't watched that many Warren Beatty movies. Like I
Mm.
haven't even seen Bonnie and Clyde, which I think is going to be next on my list, and was talking to my dad, and he really liked Heaven Can Wait. I think that'll be on the list as well. But yeah, I've always been a big Western fan, so I was excited when Dan was talking about this, and I really enjoyed this. And Dan, we can talk about sort of the details of it, but kind of like an anti-Western. I mean, there's not a lot of gunfighting, during this movie, but like they're setting up this town, and this stranger comes in, and nobody knows anything about him, and I kind of like that piece of it, especially when you think about like today, people are trying to piece together Warren Beatty's character story and like who he is and he a gunfighter, like that sort of stuff. And I really liked it. Like you said, it is pretty bleak, especially in the ending, which we can save for if anyone wants to watch it. But really thought Warren Beatty was great in this movie. I think Julie Christie, who's the female lead, it doesn't work to me if she's not as good as she is in this movie.
Phenomenal. She's phenomenal.
Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the writing. And two, Robert Altman. I realized in watching this that I don't really have a background in seeing many of his movies.
Have you
either,
seen The Player? That's
not.
the one I can ride for Altman is The Player. You need to watch The Player.
Player's great, and I think if you enjoyed this and knowing what I know about you, I think you'd like Nashville.
That was next on the list, was going to be Nashville.
And Gosford Park is a great, more one of the later Robert Altman films. His sort of take on the
Player is
incredible.
The Player is incredible. Though.
Player's great, and there are multiple references to The Player on the new Apple show, the studio. The Seth Rogen show makes a couple of Player references. Yeah, I loved some of the choices Altman made in McCabe and Mrs. Miller. Like, we don't deliberately not telling us very much about Warren Beatty's character. We don't see whatever went wrong that led him to this frontier town. It just sort of starts when he gets there, and it's sort of left deliberately vague as to what's true and what isn't about his backstory. I think it's cool. It's not glamorous at all. Like a lot of the other westerns of the 60s and 70s have, like, everybody looks like movie stars, or it's very it's very sanitized, and this movie is filthy. Like not in I mean, I guess in subject matter too, but in just the look of every scene, of every, like, this, the outside looks like a nightmare of wind and snow, and the inside doesn't look that much more hospitable. It's wood planks, and it's shelter, but that's about it. And it's a movie about it's a movie about how they can grind you down, sometimes, and the danger of being not as smart as you think you are, and it's just it's a fantastic little piece of work.
I really enjoyed even just some of the like little conversations, like a part I think early in the movie where the bartender's talking to a guy who's talking about like changing his facial hair, and then he does it, and the guy's like, "What do you think?" And he's like, "About what?" Like just like little, like just kind of random stuff on top of like the bigger story. And if you're hearing this and we're not really convincing you, I think if you watch the movie, the last like 10 to 15 minutes are totally worth watching the whole thing. It is very, very good. I would highly recommend it.
Man, I think we might be the only sports podcast who has ever done a breakdown of a Robert Altman film, because he didn't do any sports movies.
I think we've done a couple.
We've done a couple now
of Robert Altman film. I guess it would be on topic to do like a sports movie when we do these sort of breakdowns.
So I had a suggestion for a top four at some point where somebody said like a top 4 baseball movies, top 4 basketball movies, top 4 football movies. I think we could do that.
90s sports movies.
We could do that at some point.
At some point, you guys need to do top 4 like movies you've actually talked about on the podcast.
Ooh.
Oh, man.
I could do a top 400 movies we've talked about on this podcast.
And we did have a suggestion the other day, Dan, that we need to do at the end of the summer. We need to do a top 4 of the top 4 names we have called this segment.
That's as we work our way down. Hey, and McCabe and Mrs. Miller on I think it's on Max right now, by the way, and I know it's on if you got the TCM VOD on your cable provider, it should be available that way too. But it's glad you.
At some point, the TCM channel is going to be like connected with an Observer subscription.
Yeah.
We're gonna get that. We're gonna get that lined up.
I really hope you get an email at some point that's like, look, I don't really care about Auburn athletics, but y'all's film breakdowns are just so good. Hey, one other thing.
Richard Roper is a subscriber. What in the world? Ben Mankiewicz, what are you doing here?
Shout out Friendship. I don't know if y'all have seen the news.
It's not playing around here.
We didn't get Friendship at either theater.
We have not gotten Friendship yet. I am really on Prince and Needles to watch.
We may have to drive to Buford and see it at the IMAX.
Hey, y'all do it, and I'll come meet y'all there. I'd see it a second time. Me and Auburn Observer pal Ben Wolk went and saw it Saturday night. We both really enjoyed it.
Auburn AMC. You know what to do.
Ugh.
We're issuing an ultimatum.